Good morning, everybody.
Hello.
It is June 17th, 2020, and this is episode 52 of Transmission.
Yes.
And today, I refuse to believe we're talking about this today.
That's the first stage of denial.
For some reason, I'm angry, and I just want to negotiate if we could talk about something else. Wait, is that grief? I can't tell. Stage of grief, stage of denial. It's all kind of somehow the same to me.
It's kind of similar. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, series. It's so here we are, 52 episodes in, and we thought it might be fun to revisit all of our wonderful delusional ideas of grandeur when the pandemic started. It's so sad, really.
Yeah, it was like this. We were envisioning, like, at first it was like, oh crap, we're stuck indoors more than we thought. But then we're like, wait, the air is cleaner and I can see the sky. Mutual aid organizations are starting up. We're relearning what it means to be neighborly. Everything will change. We'll finally embrace a post-capitalist society as we realize what truly matters about our lives, and we will return to a sort of collective sanity. It will be glorious.
God, that just seems so naive when you put it that way.
Well, I mean, I don't think I think we always pitched it as like, wouldn't this be great if this is an opportunity?
Yeah.
And so in order to do this, if we want to move this direction, we need to really understand what's being revealed about our system. Those were the first episodes, was what's being revealed right now.
What's being revealed.
And a lot of stuff was revealed, but it's still at the same time, like, being able to go back and sit at Denny's is pretty nice. Going to a bar, oh man, I missed that. Right. And like,
yeah, so maybe this is the next thing that's being revealed. This will be the positive spin we can put on this. So the next thing that's being revealed is we don't want to learn anything from what's being revealed. And everybody's clamoring to go back to normal. And just a few minutes ago, the New York Times posted this graph about how carbon dioxide emissions are going back up. Everybody's all excited because consumer spending is way up.
Yep.
Everybody's going outdoors, not wearing masks, pretending COVID doesn't exist, and then they're getting sick.
Mm-hmm.
There's just this great article about these 16 young people that went out to a bar partying because everything was fine, and now they all have COVID, all 16 of them.
Ruh-roh, Reggie.
And
I'm going to pull up that graph using this advanced screen share technology.
Ooh, okay.
Because, so you can kind of see this.
Oh, yeah, there it is.
So there it is. Like, so clearly, like, the pandemic really didn't hit us until, end of February. And you can already see that the emissions and stuff are just...
Yeah, going right back up.
As bad as they were before, for sure.
And so, to me, what this just speaks to is that change is really hard.
Change is certainly hard, and it exposes something that, this is another pitch. If you go to the MICA, Minnesota Institute of Contemplation and Healing site, you can see that Dan has a class he's doing soon on systems thinking, systems theory, how we're not just individuals. But we still have this built-in assumption that really choices and changes happen because of choice. Like that individuals collectively all think, we win hit hearts and minds. And not enough people are like, you know what, we should pollute less. And then by shared collective will, we pollute less. And it's more complicated than that.
Yeah, exactly. And that, so the systems class, I mean, this is what we're going to be looking at, that we are caught in these very powerful networks of systemic action and behavior. And that I mean, Mark, you talk about this all the time, that things are so deterministic. I mean, that we're really caught, right? And that image of the fly caught in the spider web and kind of struggling and flailing, and the whole web is jiggling, and the spider's like, "Oh, lunch," um, it is a very apt view. And so, even when we're sitting back in our pandemic isolation going, wow, the world could be different. I could see forever. I actually could see Russia from my backyard if there was just less air pollution.
Mm-hmm. Minnesota is pretty close to
just not
Alaska.
yeah, it's not that simple. So we've got a lot of comments. People,
Yeah.
why don't we throw those up?
Uh,
It's good to see everybody showing up here.
Series writes, people are not taking the opportunity. It is sadly a collective narrative problem. That's right. Like, we have operative narratives, stories that our society tells, and they have to be replaced, and they're hard to be replaced. So a great example of this is the phrase Black Lives Matter, which is a very small story, right? And we are in a moment where people were taking that story seriously. And we already talked about this a couple episodes ago about the white backlash, how quickly that's rolled back. Because if you take that short narrative seriously, which isn't even asking that much of us to say Black Lives Matter, it calls into question a number of stories upon which our whole entire society is built. And those become fragile if you take Black Lives Matter seriously. Right. And to a certain point, you can do that, and then you're like, nope, I have to find a way to make this just a nice little talking point without any teeth.
Right. And as one Black friend of mine posted a couple days ago, like she said, white people still have not figured out that Black Lives Matter, and now we expect them to figure out how to defund the police. I was like, yeah, well, that's a good point. All right. So what else?
Series also writes, collective trauma, defense mechanisms, and disassociations are showing up. Amen. Like when you're freaked out, the most comforting thing you can do is go do things that you're familiar with.
That are familiar. Yep.
Like things that really are enjoyable. Like, so it's like, why if I'm stressed out, I'm still like, I could really go for some mashed potatoes, even though I know better. Like, it's just, we're not rational. We like to think we're rational and in all these ways, but we're not.
Yeah. And it's not just when we're stressed out that we go back to doing particular things. It's that when we're stressed out, we fall back into just these huge habits of behavior, right? It's a whole habitual system. And again, this is the system part. And so like one of the collective narratives and stories is the economy is good when consumers are buying lots of stuff. Mm-hmm. And so when yesterday it came out that consumer spending was up, the biggest monthly increase ever from April to May, you could just like feel all of America singing blissfully in happiness because, that's just this great thing. And so again, it's really, really challenging on a system level to counteract that, because it's very powerful, and this is what, I mean, if you're into Hinduism or Buddhism, right? I mean, this is what karma is about. That karma is this incredible, invisible force of momentum that is moving through human and non-human reality. And it's like this giant steamroller, and you can't really slow it down very easily. So what else have we got?
Connie writes, change is even harder if it is not a choice or one or all make. I'm not exactly sure what you're saying there, but part of what I'm taking away from that comment is we do have some levels of choice, and this is where discernment is important, is where we can hone in. So, I talk about Hannah Arendt all the time, and one of the things Hannah Arendt points out in her book, I think it's called On Revolutions, is that revolutions aren't planned, right? You can't make it happen. They erupt, but at the same time, if you hadn't done preparing beforehand, when interruption happens, it doesn't get directed anywhere. And so there's this weird tension. Like you have to start building systems and ways of pushing against this deterministic karmic field or whatever. Mm-hmm. But knowing that you might not, that doesn't mean that you're going to enact your will in the world. There's sometimes things have to click into the right way, and there has to be an eruption for you to have momentum. And so now we're seeing with this current happenings in Minneapolis and now everywhere else around the world, that there was an eruption, and that it gives us some freedom to make different choices. But now we're finding like, okay, we had some optimism, but we realized this is going to be a long haul struggle for us to get any gains whatsoever.
Right. Yeah, and Gus's comment about the onion there. Yeah, I did see that. Right.
Yeah, did you see the Onion? City moves to stage 4 of pretending COVID doesn't exist. Just a little too on the nose. I feel like
I mean, that's not the Onion.
Everything is really on the nose these days because it's just we're living.
Yeah, no, I mean that's absolutely real, right? And then what's happening? I mean, just before the show, I just jumped on to look at Arizona and Texas numbers, and it's terrifying. I mean, I think that Houston, Dallas, Phoenix, I mean, it could easily be another New York within a short period of time. And those are all places that opened up fast and early where, yeah, people were just pretending it didn't exist with that incredible desire to get back to normal.
Karen writes, but is the real issue that they can't figure it out? Or is the real issue that we aren't getting what we want, and it hurts to admit how hard it is?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that one of the big issues, and this is one of the reasons that I'm doing this systems class, is that we don't see the systems. They're invisible, right? So individuals are visible, and I'm an individual, and I kind of feel that individualism. And so it's just very easy to operate and act on that level. Mm-hmm. But these systems you can't see them. You can only see their effects, and you can only kind of see the ripples that they create. And so it's a lot more difficult than to engage that level of reality and to try to change it. And it takes, some training, some level of awareness. And and again, I mean, this is ultimately what spiritual practice and community are about, is really trying on a very regular, very intentional basis to shift. And when we're talking about racism and the issues of shifting relationships, to shift our pattern of relationships in the world.
Kathleen says, I've been thinking back to how so many of us supported ending apartheid in South Africa, but couldn't see the racism in our own nation.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And actually, today the UN is taking this up, and it's very, very fascinating, right? That all the African nations petitioned the United Nations to have a discussion about the problem of racism in the United States. This is the first time that this has ever happened, and they forced this in the General Assembly. And I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the U.S. is just ignoring it or not even coming. But yeah, I mean, that Jesus mentions the log in our own eye, for sure.
Rising consumption is a curse. Mm-hmm. That's what Gary says. This is the challenge because how it's baked in. So Amy and I are 44, and we're starting to think, we have one child, our world is uncertain, and we need to have some retirement. And so we started talking to like a Mennonite retirement person, and he was like, from the get-go, is like, when you invest money to retire, it's like, it's not like it's clean. Like he's just like laying it out because he knows enough about us. And saying it all, any investment, any retirement assumes that there's continual growth. That's how you get a return on your investment. And so is growth any good? No. So we try to invest in things that are less damaging or more helpful. But the reality is this entire ball of wax depends on continual growth. And so we had a candid conversation about that. And this is the sort of thing, we're so many of us are tied into this continual growth, and that's part of the denial piece.
Right.
It's like that we can think. That's why people were freaking out a lot by the, we never did an episode on this, but the Michael Moore documentary, which has all sorts of complications, and I understand there's some factual issues. But part of the frustration that people had is a lot of people really put a lot of trust in green alternatives that still work within a capitalist mode of production. And part of the thing it points out is like, even that is naive. And this is hard, like, because it'd be better to not have this reality. It'd be better if every story we brought up believing were true.
Yeah, and the green energy thing really is a perfect example of that. And I actually had not even heard of this movie, and had not heard that it was a big problem. And I started watching it, and I was like, yeah, what he's saying is obviously true. And I guess people in the green energy world were totally flipping out. But the point of the movie essentially is, if your model of energy consumption is endless growth and more energy, you cannot do that in a green and sustainable way. And that's something that many of us within the green energy world have talked about and known for years and years and years. And the one thing that we don't want to talk about is actually, how can we use less energy? Like, that's the only thing that is green and sustainable, is using less. But we don't want to talk about that. We just want to build bigger and bigger windmills and more solar panels, with the idea that then that's somehow green, which it really isn't. All right, let's move on. Heather's got a great comment here.
If we're willing to hear one story that deeply contradicts our own, then and only then our paralyzed body soul begins to awaken.
Yes, that's beautiful. Right. And so that is that allowing in, and that's why, I want to have this title, Stages of Denial, because part of what denial is about is that we don't want to hear a different story. Right. So, simplest example, right? The alcoholic doesn't want to hear that he drinks too much. So, right. So when we're actually able to hear a different story, that's why white people have such a hard time with this Black Lives Matter thing, right? Because that's a different story. It's actually admitting, oh, I support and live in this country where Black lives don't matter. Now I need to hear that story, and the story that they do matter. Now I have to start changing.
No, and this, it raises cognitive dissonance. And so we see this happening right now. So people start feeling like, oh, what am I supposed to do with this conflicting data? I feel uncomfortable. From maybe sometimes people who want to be perceived as polite will make verbally acquiesce. So that's why all these conservatives started posting Black Lives Matter for a couple of days, right? And then all of a sudden it's like, I need to resolve this tension. So they either like jump into the void and start saying, I don't know what this is going to look like, but I'm going to see what happens on the other side of this narrative. I'm going to dive into it. Or they entrench back, and then they get crabby. It's like, oh, you guys always make everything about race. It's you complaining about race so much that it's actually the problem. And if we can get away from hyphenated types of Americans, then we can be a colorblind, blah, blah, blah society.
Well, or the backlash thing, which you posted a bunch of articles about yesterday, about how no, Black Lives Matter is just an evil socialist plot, and so it's not Christian.
It's a bunch of queers. I've seen that, a lot of that too. Like, we should care about our Black brothers and sisters in Christ, but did you know that Black Lives Matter was started by queer women? That's the real agenda.
Yeah.
You start caring about Black Lives Matter, before you know it, you'll have to start caring about queer lives too.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and again, these are all the systemic resistances to any kind of transformation.
Yes. Laura points out that crisis accelerates change. It sure can, yeah.
Yeah, it definitely can. And then though, and as and this is what I feel like we're seeing. So we had this crisis, we made all these changes, but then it's also, like a rubber band. And I talk about this individually as what I call ego backlash. When people are trying to change, They're making these changes, they're having some new behaviors, and then suddenly, like, something happens and they feel they're right back where they started from. And I talk about the ego backlash, and it's sort of like you're stretching this rubber band and you want it to kind of break or be different, and then suddenly it zaps back, it pulls you back into these habitual patterns. So Jeremy's got a long comment here.
Jeremy writes, I think the real problem is a lack of collective vision. It's very easy to challenge what currently exists. It's much harder to paint a picture of the desired future, yet that vision is what pulls people forward. This is why the kingdom of God that Jesus talks about is so powerful and attractive. Rather than focusing on defunding the police and challenging capitalism, how do we collectively cast vision? Once we have a picture of where we are going, then it trails off. I could spend 3 hours talking about this one. I tend to disagree, but my way of looking at things is kind of interesting. Jesus does not cast a picture of what the kingdom looks like. He calls it a bunch of seed and shit. Like, he doesn't really, but he does demonstrate it by how he acts. So to me, this is the thing. Like, is Jesus casting a clear vision of an alternative society or not? Kind of, but not. He's not laying out. I mean, if you create a perfect utopian example of society, which Karl Marx did, and then say this is the vision and try to get people there, problematic things happen. So I tend to be more of a process guy.
Right.
And there's a lot more I could say about that, but basically I think we do have to demonstrate and show we have to put stuff into action in more than just words and being against things.
Yeah, and I think it's a both and, because there certainly are, as you said, there are elements to the vision that is cast, right? So love your enemies, love God, love neighbor, heal people. It's a place where everybody eats together, right? So I mean, I think there are elements to a vision, but then I think that this process part that you're getting to is really what is key, because and that's where the spiritual life and practice comes in, right? And so the spiritual life and practice, it casts a vision of process more than a vision of content. And so it casts this vision of, okay, this is a process of how people live together, rearranging their relationships. And that will get us somewhere. And we don't know exactly where it gets us terms of content, but we know that the process starts to look different, and that's what's really important.
And it's also, there's this other piece to it too, that to people who are kind of beholden to a particular narrative, anything that contradicts it will be immediately perceived as negative, even if it says a positive. So a good example of this is the stuff around defunding the police sounds negative. But if you look beyond that simple statement, almost everything is a positive assertion of how we can respond to all these issues without using weaponized killers. And so there's this whole vision of defunding and refunding these other things that's all out there. It's not like it's being hidden. And it's not like any activist who's a police abolitionist is avoiding talking about any positives.
Right.
It just sounds negative because we cannot imagine society without police. So of course,
and that gets to Heather's point, right? That what we see is this immediate rejection of a different story, right? People don't even want to let it in, right? I mean, and again, with Google, right, it is easier than ever to actually look stuff up and learn things, right? And you could just Google, what does defund the police mean? And you would get all this stuff, like, instantly, and you could read it. And what is fascinating is when people read some of these things. So like a while back, I posted one very simple example of what this meant, and suddenly there were all these people who are like, oh yeah, that's a great idea, I'm totally for that. Right? But they were all people, many of whom had immediately said, oh, that's to me. Right. And so that's that process of, can we let a different story even in to listen to?
Yeah.
And Karen's right. She makes this comment. Yeah, some people don't choose. Right. I mean, we can't force them. Exactly. And that's the again, that's this reality of alternative communities often just start with a group of people who said, well, yeah, I can't fix the wider world, but can we at least get a few people together to try something different?
Right. Gary has a link here. I'll leave up for a few moments. I think I know where this is about the introduction to Franciscan economics. So there's movements within kind of the Catholic sphere of more of a, I don't want to necessarily use the word progressive, but more of a humane kind of way of understanding economics. I know this has been influential for how Pope Francis has talked about ecology and economics. And it's definitely worth looking into, especially for people who want a theological framework.
Yeah.
Understanding this stuff.
Yeah, Sirius has a good question here.
Is the high amount of conspiracy theories a manifestation of denial as well?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. They're just a great distraction. I mean, to me, they're part of the dissociation you were talking about. That, yeah, we just kind of bounce off into some weird world that can endlessly distract and fascinate us, but isn't part of reality. Robot birds.
Gary clarifies that he's an Anglican Franciscan. Yeah, I said Catholic, but you're right. There's more. There's Anglican Franciscans, and then there's ecumenical order Franciscans. So Francis can be approached, and Franciscan thinking is available to all, not just Catholics.
There's even Mennonites that wear St. Francis on their arm.
Yeah. I can see if I can get my tattoo. Yeah. There we go.
There he is. All right. Let's keep rolling. This is great.
I've noticed comments. Yeah, I've noticed Jesus is destructive of things in ways that bring new people in. He abolished restrictive purity, for example, in ways that allow him to redefine who his brothers and sisters are. I'm expanding it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. It's an interesting dynamic if we use Jesus as an example of this. And this is part of my struggle, I think, when we talk about when people say, Mark, tell me what you're for, not what you're against. Cast a picture. What should society look like if we don't have capitalism? And then all of a sudden, what the dynamic has shifted where I have to convince them before they sign on. And that immediately feels like a trap because, it's like, I think it is enough to notice the things around us that are death dealing and say no to them. That even if that's all we did, that's enough. You don't have to justify saying no to things that bring death and then say, like, I'm sorry, police officer, please don't murder that man. Let me lay out my 12-page proposal about what an alternative to policing is. Now, do we need to get to alternatives to policing? Yes, but to me, that has to be a shared, discerned process. And it can't be blueprinted too quickly. Otherwise, it becomes...
Well, and I also think that one of the obvious ways that question is a trap is that there actually are a lot of those blueprints for something like policing. And then people don't even want to look those up, or they do look them up, and then they immediately say how they're not possible.
Yeah, I remember in early days of Black Lives Matter, when people are focusing on how much it's negative to shut down interstates, the movement for Black Lives had a 8-point policy proposal thing that was just really laid out, and they were trying to advocate that. And if everyone had said, "Oh, Black Lives Matter," so negative, would have just looked at that, we maybe would have had some momentum. But people just didn't want to look at that because it takes work. Max writes, one of the opportunities, quote unquote, of COVID, especially for white people, was time to pause, be in relation to people we're living with. When folks had a chance to be with their thoughts and with their family instead of all the distractions of work, consumerism, etc. But I think that time and what folks saw during it terrified them, hence the, quote, open the state back up, quote, unquote, protests. Mm-hmm. But I also wonder how some of the white allies jumping onto anti-racism work with renewed passion. I'm assuming that if you write too long of a comment, it'll just cut you off on this platform. So that the end of these comments are lost to us for forever. But I do think where I'm perceiving you're going there is maybe it did open up a reflective space for the number of white allies to get on board with this, and that maybe the opportunities of COVID contributed to this sort of uprising moment that we're in. And I think that's true. I think there's definitely truth to that.
Yeah, but I do think the point you've got there, Max, in the middle of this is really right on. I mean, I have talked to a lot of people who have said being more alone with my thoughts was terrifying. They actually have said that exact thing. Um, and so there's a tremendous push and desire to ramp back up. Now, alternatively, and I was just talking with somebody about this yesterday, as people now are starting to ramp back up into their normal lives, for some people for whom that open time was actually helpful and they used it to do positive work, even though some of what they found was terrifying. And now they're starting to ramp back up, and immediately they're getting sucked back into all these negative habits. And they're suddenly finding, like, oh my gosh, it's really hard to maintain all of the positive things that I was doing when I wasn't back to normal. And again, to me, this is a discernment thing. It's like, yeah, because back to normal was not great.
Well, and you need systems of support, and that's why it's hard to do. If our dominant system pulls you one way, you have to have like amazing heroic level willpower to not to be sucked into things, and that's not realistic to expect. Max clarifies the statement. Thanks for clarifying this. This is an interesting direction you're taking it. But I also wonder how some of the white allies jumping onto anti-racism work with renewed passion, while clearly necessary, are also doing something similar, throwing themselves into a movement to help them, then to really be present with their own selves and the void produced by the,
yeah. No, absolutely.
That's true.
I think it is just part of that ramping back to all of these ego habits, individual and systemic. So we're past the time. This was great. Thank you for the very lively conversation. And, and again, this is sort of sad, but I think it's very important to be realistic about what we're dealing with and up against. And then that can help us to continue forward in a good way.
Yeah, and just to me, and to leave things on a hopeful note, and this is something Dan brings up a lot, like the power of these small communities, monastic communities. They're not just quaint. The truth is, like, we can build alternatives, but they have to start in shared practices where you can create your own little system that can have its own narratives that it follows that challenge the bigger ones. Like, otherwise, it's not going to come by just an individual, like, reading just the right thing and then boldly defying culture. Like, there's some of that obviously does happen, but whenever possible, and this is to me one of the great promises of the church and why I'm so continually disappointed, is churches are a perfect context for recreating alternative systems along different narratives, competing narratives. And the fact that we collectively don't do great at that bums me out. So we'll see you all tomorrow.
Sounds good. Bye.